an inspirational story, both because it has more chances to be written, and maybe this conversation and what you come away with can help with. Sure.
It's got a wired up, mate. Not coming through.
No, it's good. It's good now. So what John has laid out is an inspirational story, I think, for at least two reasons, because it invites more chapters to be written, and this is one of the reasons to have this meeting. And so it's fascinating to hear how much you are enjoying it still, after all, but also for what can be carried away elsewhere, and what this says about rural development and community development, and how we plan our societies as well. Blanche, what would you join in with now for 3 minutes?
Okay, may not take 3 minutes. Do you want me to stand up? Sit down?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I was taking notes as John was talking because it's really interesting to hear your local story. And the other week we had a meeting in London of people who were interested in setting up some sort of local rural hub in their areas, bringing communities together around things that they were doing. And that relates a lot to my work in Wales at the Centre for Alternative Technology, where I lived for 9 years. And lots of very similar sort of points to make to yourself. I think one thing that I'm very interested in is community land trusts and how people use and approach the land and work with the land. And this is a movement that is growing rapidly, I think, around the country. You see it up in Scotland. In Wales, I was involved 10 years ago now, starting a community land trust, which is now about to put in for planning for housing on the edge of a village. And that meant working with the Forestry Commission and convincing them that Forestry Commission land is actually brownfield. And that took a number of years because it had all been industrially agriculturalised, industrial growing of timber that wasn't much use, and convincing them that in fact it could be managed and owned locally by people on a peppercorn lease over a 99-year period, and also use that for what you might call sustainable development, people managing it locally and also growing houses on the site, growing children on the site, growing businesses on the site, and food and all sorts of other things. So looking at what you have locally, I think, is really important. The Centre for Alternative Technology is the UK's oldest environment centre, set up in the early 70s. And a lot of you may have been there, and I recognise a few faces from there. I think the thing about CAT, it was always envisaged as, it was seen locally by the local people as the hippies on the hill. This is deep mid-Wales. You know, when they came in the 70s, there was a lot of people coming from London, setting up in the countryside and exploring renewable energy and off-grid living as a commune, eventually a community, now a cooperative. Still works as a cooperative, but it's one of the largest local employers, employing 150 people, at least of half of whom are actually local of origin. And what's interesting about the centre is that it's had to overcome that kind of initial distance from the local community as an incomer to that sort of situation. And I think it still faces those challenges today. I think I'm very interested in how people work together, and in fact I think a lot of those differences disappear completely once you start working together as communities. But I think we're going to see a lot more people moving around and turning to work and live on the land who might not traditionally have come from that kind of background. So there's going to be an interesting kind of development, hopefully, but it will be quite challenging to people how we sort of approach each other as strangers and so on. So I'll just sort of I'll finish up with a little anecdote from today, which is I came by train and then on foot and explored public transport locally just to see what it was like to come here. And quite an unfriendly bus driver who wouldn't tell me that Tesco's was the nearest place, probably because I was an outsider and, you know, whatever. And I ended up trying to cross the Tesco's car park and ended up in a thorn bush and, you know, was cursing, why didn't I bring my bike at least, you know. And then ended up walking the next 2 miles across wheat fields and bridle paths and so on, and thinking, blimey, where is this place? And then I saw it like a glittering Shangri-La in the distance. Like, oh, fantastic! You know, there's maybe it's a mirage, maybe it's real. And then these strangers, complete strangers, stopped, and I'd hit the main road again by that point. And they said, are you going to the secret garden party? And I said, yes. And they said, well, hop on board, stranger. And I thought they must be out-of-towners who'd come, who'd all, you know, yeah, we're going there too. But they weren't. They were local people. And they're going, yeah, we'll be back tonight, but you can tell that we're local because we're the clean ones. So I thought that was really nice. And, you know, for me, that's just, again and again, I've done lots of travelling, lots of working in different places, and all the time you're just reinforced, you know, that people are just so keen to work together, actually, I think, is the main thing, and find our way through. And in fact, in this new sort of economic and political climate, that's going to be much more important. We're going to have to face our issues ourselves. And I'm absolutely excited about the current situation, because although it's going to be very difficult, I think a lot of people will lose their jobs, will lose their homes and so on. However, we have resources that we just don't use. So I see that as less wasteful, using our capacity better, getting to know each other better, and finding a way through to something which is genuinely durable and enjoyable and fun. So I'm glad I'm here.
Hi, yeah, my name's Mischa, and I spend a lot of time doing community work, mostly in Brighton, where I'm based, and we did a community project down there where we built a fully off-grid sustainable community centre. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that project, not particularly from a technical point of view, although I will quickly just brush over some of the information on the building because it's interesting, but I'm going to look at it as a bit of a community process, because all the way through, as we worked with the project, we tried to engage and enrol and enable as many people as possible to actually get involved and to learn real practical skills that they could go out and actually apply in their own lives and in other situations. About 7-8 years ago, a whole group of people came together basically wanting to build an off-grid community centre, and we were really inspired by this American guy, Mike Reynolds, who had invented out in the hot deserts of New Mexico this building type called an Earthship. And an Earthship is a totally off-grid, independent building. It's very, very different to the majority of buildings that we have in the UK. And that's interesting in itself. It's not necessarily that all buildings should perhaps go towards that way, but as John alluded, when you're building in rural situations, sometimes you have to think quite carefully about the infrastructure that you're going to put in place, because when it comes to connecting buildings up to main services, unless you happen to be right next to them, it's generally the case that service companies aren't too happy really about indulging your whim and connecting you up. So we were a group of people who came together, wanted to build this building, and where we were, there was an organic farm, and these people had a genuine need for a building. They had a mouldy old porter cabin, and that was their building. That's where they met, that's where they worked, that's what they played, that's what they did. But as all mouldy old porter cabins, it was falling to bits, and it was a fairly horrid place. So we decided we would replace that with this Earthship, and it was really a fusion of two communities coming together, and that in itself was quite tricky because it was a whole group of people coming together to do something. But as we got on and we built, we taught people very, very low impact, low skill methods of building, construction, whether it be through rammed tyres or working with mud, clay, rendering, lots of different things, building out of waste. And that's one of the things that really, really fascinates us. Low impact buildings made from waste that use the planet's natural systems to power them, looking at the way buildings can actually just work with the powerful, inarguable forces of nature to provide a low energy, low carbon future. Because the buildings we have at the moment, they're very hungry. In many ways, we live in building sized Hummers, SUVs, lots of our houses, they guzzle lots and lots of energy, lots of coal, etc., to provide services. So what we're interested in really is enabling people to build buildings that can power themselves and just work with the sun, with the wind, with the rain, and just use natural biological processes to treat all wastewater. So we got on and we built. We had big issues with the planning system because where we're actually based is now part of a national park. It wasn't at the time. It's subsequently changed its status, but it was an area of outstanding natural beauty. And our project, it's been, I would say, fairly successful. There have been many challenges, and probably one of them is bringing communities together. Blanche made a really, really interesting point about how you fuse together different groups and how there are always tensions. But when people actually start to work together, those tensions they start to dissolve and you get a more practical outcome. But for us, I think one of the main realisations has been, since we have completed that project, how there is a fundamental lack of access to cheap, affordable land in this country. From the people we spoke to, we run lots and lots of self-build courses, training people in lots of different low-impact techniques. the one thing that really stops those people from actually realising a better, low-impact, sustainable future for themselves is the fact that they don't have access to cheap, affordable land to make things happen. And that's very, very important. The main reason that it's important is in this country we have a monopoly of house building, and the volumes of our houses, most of them, we're looking at 150, 200,000 homes a year, are built by volume house building companies. Most of them were FTSE 100 listed. They're not anymore. That's thanks to the credit crunch, or not thanks to the credit crunch if you're a shareholder in any of those companies. But if you look at the situation in other parts of Europe, what's interesting is it isn't the case that such large corporations have a stranglehold over the supply of housing. And the supply of housing is a crucial human right that we need to empower ourselves to have. So if people had access to cheap land, they could get on and build good quality housing for themselves. And that, I believe, is one of the reasons why housing is in such bad shape in the UK today, because we rely on a very small number of people to deliver inferior quality housing for us. And it's a simple thing. If you do something for yourself, you do it properly. If you're doing it for someone else, you might not do it quite so well, although if you're generous of spirit, naturally you will do it as well as if you were doing it for yourself. But if you are realising something purely for profit, and that's essentially what's happening, then we end up with poor quality housing. And the other main reason that I will mention volume house building is because they have a thing called land banks. And these people, these companies, they buy up huge tracts of land, and it means that people like myself, perhaps some of the people like you, certainly a lot of the people that have come down and visited our centre in Brighton, don't have the possibility to go out and build a low carbon, low energy future for themselves. So really, the point I'm trying to make is, for us to have a better future, we really need access to land. Thank you.
So, thank you for inviting me. My name is Maria. I'm not used to speaking on stage, and English is not my first language, so please bear with me. Good thing it's 3 minutes, so we can talk later and in chunks. It's a lot easier. I think, well, I came to the UK 6 years ago, and I got involved with a project that was just beginning in London called The Hub, where a few of us are part of as well. The purpose of that place is to create community. We talk about intentional communities in comparison to local communities, because it's something that happens in big urban spaces. It's not the local geography that brings people together, but it's the passion and the values that people share that brings people together to do something more than consuming in a big city. So it started in London, and there are now about 25 around the world, and the number keeps growing, because it seems like it's not that we want to go and start hubs, but it's people coming and saying, how can we learn from you? We want something similar. We need spaces. We need spaces to share. It seems like everyone is talking about that for the last at least 6 years that I've been part of, traveling and talking to groups, trying to improve the way they're living. Space is always an issue. Space is always what comes. So where do we hold our conversations? Where do we share our resources? Where do we